Hello everyone, this is Richard here from ZP Productions, and today we'll be having the initial impression of this camera here. This is the Panasonic S1R. So the Panasonic S1R is part of Panasonic's new mirrorless cameras. This is one of the three S line of camera, the S1, the S1R and the S1H. Together they are part of the L mount alliances, which include Sigma, Leica and Panasonic themselves. So this is of course a first impression video, so I will just really quickly say about what I feel about this camera itself. Now, firstly, this camera is huge. As you can see, with its 50mm lens, it looks like a DSLR. Now, if you compare it to the Canon with also the 50mm lens, the Canon actually looks smaller significantly. If you actually just look from the back, and remember, this is a plate and there's no plate here. And even the lens itself, the S1R is the heaviest 50mm lens you can get. This lens is slightly heavier than the Canon and it is longer, but of course thinner than the Canon, which is a 51.2. Okay, so that being said, it has a very huge body and a very big build. There is some good things of it and some downsides. So let's talk about the good things first. Firstly, it has everything a DSLR have, which means buttons, top LCD, back panel, or more than enough functions that go around. It even comes with a full HDMI port. This is really rare for a camera in the mirrorless age. Only for those video-centric cameras, there is such a port itself. This really has everything you need to do outside on buttons to operate it quickly. And when you flick it on, you get to see every single information on the top LCD at the back, and it has also a very big viewfinder. This is of course a 5 million plus resolution viewfinder, similar as what you see on the GFX. That being said, the big build does have some downsides. First, one of the downsides I felt was the handling itself. Now, this handling is a bit too big for my hands, so actually if you look at here, I couldn't really grip it fully. There's a gap between my fingers and the front. So holding a landscape is fine because there is a cutout, so I can put my hands here. But if I want to hold it very securely in portrait, it feels really unsecure to me, and I'm scared that it will drop off because it's just resting all on my grip. Okay, so that is the handling. There's also one more thing about the physical feature that I thought Panasonic was a bit different from normal, and that is the flip screen. Now, this is a very photographic-oriented screen. What it does is that it flips to the back and it flips to the side. This is really good for photographic. It's fast, it's quick, but unlike the swivel screen, it doesn't go in front and it doesn't give a full amount of rotation and of course angles to view from. If you ask me, this is good for photography, not so great for video, which is a bit weird because Panasonic has always been a strong proponent of video hybrid cameras. Now that we talk about as a stills camera, this is of course the 47 megapixel version, the S1R. So maybe that's the reason why the screens are like that, because on S1H it does have the proper swivel screens. Okay, so much for the physical. Let's talk about its autofocus system. Now, this autofocus system on the S1R is really quick. So if you look here, it has a joystick, so you can actually change the AF point quickly. So if we look here, we quickly AF around, here, or even here. You see, the AF is really quick. Now, compared to other mirrorless cameras, this S1R in single point AF is probably as fast as it gets for a 50mm 1.4 lens. One of the things about this AF is because it uses Panasonic DFD. DFD is depth from defocus. Now, there is advantage and disadvantage. Firstly, this is a pure contrast AF system, so it will not suffer from things like bending and what's not. However, it will suffer from pulsation if you do continuous AF. So let's switch this to continuous AF here and let's focus on something. If you notice the blinds behind, now I don't really know you can see it, but you can see the blinds actually flickering in and out. That is the pulsation effect of the camera. One more again. Look at the blinds and you will notice this very small little pulse effect. And that is because of its contrast AF system, because the contrast AF need to go forward and backward to actually know whether something is in focus or not. And that, I think the focus is fine. I tried it in an outdoor shoot and it's all very accurate. Now, there is one time where it didn't really focus, and that is when I was testing. So let me load up this video here. you will notice that it just can't focus if something is very badly backlit. Now, maybe I thought it's this camera, but when I tried in my GFX, with my Canon, with my EM1X, all of them could actually achieve focus well, and I could even see the focal length of the lens. However, on the S1R, I can never get it to focus. So this is a really extreme case of backlight. Maybe most people will never meet it. So I think it doesn't really matter. But just to note, in backlight situation, the DFD system on the S1R will get affected to a certain extent. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the IBIS in this camera. This camera definitely have one of the best IBIS system I ever seen. I tried and I could easily handhold this lens with a more than 50% capture rate at 1.8. That is approximately 3 stops of image stabilization on a full frame 47 megapixel camera. In addition to the very good IBIS, I felt that there is this little mini game, as you can see in this video here. What this mini game does is, as long as you keep the focal point or the green point in the center as close as possible and take a shot, you're almost guaranteed that the shot should be relatively sharp. Why do I say relatively? Because sometimes it can just be a little soft, but more often than not, it should be sharp enough for the purpose of your usage. Now, this mini game is really useful because if you do landscape in very dark conditions, you don't really want to keep checking your photos. Straight away, using this IS scope, they call it, and you can roughly guess whether you're in focus or not, rather than having to review the photos shot through shot. Okay, that is about it for the IS, the AF, the handling. There's one more thing I'll talk about is the battery itself for the physical part. Now, this battery on Panasonic is really huge. I believe Panasonic is just future-proofing their camera. This battery is a 3000 milliamp battery of 23 watt-hour. Now, if you compare this battery with its competitors like the Canon LP-E6N, now this battery is only 60% of capacity compared to this battery. This is just a 14 watt-hour battery. So this battery is really huge. However, in terms of battery life, a lot of people say that the S1R do not last really long, 400 plus shots, 500 shots. So even with a large battery, the S1R do drain a little bit more power than normal. And maybe in future cameras, right, where they cut down the power consumption, with this huge battery, I'm sure it could last a day. Okay, yeah, there's one last thing of this big body I want to talk about, which is this. This is something that Nikon and Canon neglected. This is the SD card and this is the XQD card. So they actually had the most common media and the fastest media you can put in a camera together. This is definitely very thoughtful and very useful in the future because XQD really does clear buffer a lot quicker than the SD card. Now, so much for the physical dimensions of this camera. Now let's look at its image quality. So what I'm going to bring you through is the image quality of the S1R. So what you have here is a shot I done recently. It's a bright daylight. Of course, this shot is a bit edited. Now let's look at this raw. First thing I noticed out of the camera is that this sensor does produce really nice blues. And the blue is really prominent. So even though this person should be in the shadow and the sky should be almost white, I could see quite a bit of blue. So the sensor is capturing a good amount of blue and I can utilize it. Now if we do zoom in, let's go to normal again, we do zoom in, the camera is of course really sharp. It captures every single detail on the head, on her face, every single strand on the head. And don't forget, this is a 47 megapixel camera. Shot at f1.6, I think I shifted the aperture ring. And overall the quality is great, and the center itself. So moving on from this, let's look at a comparison. Now this comparison is between 50 mm. Let's look at the flag photos. Oh, yes, here. Okay, wait, give me a moment here. So this is a 50 mm comparison. So what I will do is I will load the Canon on the left side and the S1R on the right side, as you can see here now. Firstly, if you look at this image itself, the Panasonic is darker. I will rate it about half a stop darker than the the Canon shot on the left side. So the Canon is about half a stop brighter itself. Now, I cannot really do very significant dynamic range tests here, but what you can see is that, let's look at the highlights itself. So the Canon do actually blow out most of the highlights. So the highlights are really quite white, and let's say if I do reduce the exposure significantly, right, the Canon do, you really lose some of the details here, you really can't see much. Now on the Panasonic itself, if I do the same thing, let me press the button correctly, right, I just also did what I did the same thing is I reduced the exposure by 2 stops itself. You can see that all the details of the cloud that is not available. I can look at this and then look at this. There is just so much more details in the highlight on the Panasonic camera. Now, this may be because it's half a stop underexposed. This is because the 47 megapixel on the Panasonic is slightly better. But this is my initial impression. I'll probably do more research on it in later days. Okay, now let us reset these shots again. Bring up by 2 stops and then bring up by 2 stops. So let's zoom in straight into the center and look at the image quality. Of course, now we are not really so much talking about the 47 megapixel. We are also talking about the fantastic 50mm S Pro lens that is mounted on the camera now. Now, if you look in the center itself, the Canon on the left side and the Panasonic on the right, you notice that the Panasonic does have a slightly better contrast. Look at the foliage. Look at the foliage itself. It's just slightly better contrast. In terms of sharpness, I don't think there's any difference, but in terms of contrast, there is a little bit of difference that favors the S1R. Also note that the S1R, because of its 47 megapixel camera, even though yes, both lenses look quite sharp at 1:1, but if you zoom 3:1, a lot of times zoom, you definitely see that the 47 megapixel comes ahead in terms of details. Look at all the details at the buildings behind. This is of course lost in the Canon EOS R, which is only 30 megapixels. Okay, but this is center, and if you look at the edges, right, there is something that is very peculiar, is that the 50mm on the Canon lens, or the Canon 50mm RF, does give you a slightly contrastier and sharper shot versus the S1R on the edge itself, the right edge here. I just noticed that the foliage and stuff just have a little mushy feel versus the Canon. Maybe it's because it's 47 megapixel is out resolving the lens, or maybe just the RF is so good that the 30 megapixel is getting eaten for lunch, and maybe a higher res camera would have shown a slight difference. But that is pretty much all the comparison I noticed. If you look at the foliage at the bottom corner, it's the same thing. There is this slight, very slight smearing effect on the S1R, and it's not available on the Canon. Oh, just a note, both are shot at f4, so they do have enough depth of field as this is nearly infinity. This is like probably 2 or 3 km away from my block. Okay, that is so much for image quality on the initial review, because I need more time to test out, and I only own the camera for about 3 days since I took it over from SLR Revolution. Yes, just to say that this camera is actually loaned to me by SLR Revolution and Panasonic Singapore. You can see the link below. They do have a very good price of this S1R now. Their price is about 4,000 Sing dollars, and if you get it from SLR Revolution, you probably can get it slightly cheaper or slightly more expensive depending on the promotion period. That said, now that we touch on pricing, the S1R on the US is really expensive. It is a 3.6K USD camera. While in Singapore, you can probably get it for about 4,000 Sing dollars on street price, which is about, I think, 2.9K. That is a significant difference. Now, same here for the S Pro 50mm lens here. This 50mm lens costs 2.3K USD in B&H. Now, this is 100 USD more than the Canon RF 50mm where it's not on discount. And today, where the RF is actually on discount, this lens is about 200 USD more than the Canon lens itself. This is expensive, but it's a really good lens, as you can see in the image comparison just now. In the center, it's probably as good, if not slightly better than the 50mm, maybe due to megapixel differences. At the edge, not really as great, but maybe it's because of the megapixel again. The build quality of this lens is fantastic. It's just really expensive. However, no fear, because this is part of the L-mount Alliance. As part of the L-mount Alliance, Sigma will be launching every single of their art lens on the L-mount. And therefore, in maybe the year ahead, you can pretty much be sure that there is cheap lens for almost every single range you need for the S1R. Other than that, this is pretty much my initial impression. So I would say, as to summarize my initial impression, very big body, nice layout of buttons, plenty of buttons to press at, good ergonomics if your hand is big enough. The screen itself is photographic centric. I prefer it over the swivel because I find the swivel requires a lot more effort to use it. Very nice EVF, very good IBIS, decent AF other than when it's very backlit. Nice that it has 2 card slot, one SD and then one XQD. Very nice big battery, which means in the future any improved camera will have a better battery life. And most importantly, the image quality is fantastic because this lens with this sensor combination does show that it can resolve a lot of information. Something that can't be said for anything that is not launched recently. So that is pretty much my initial review for the Panasonic S1R. Once again, I want to thank S1R Revolution for helping me loan this camera from Panasonic Singapore. Without them, I would not be able to give you this review. I do hope that you patronize them if you want to buy any form of camera. And as I said, the S1R is really cheap in Singapore at about 4,000 Sing dollars. Hope you enjoy it and see you next time. Do watch my other videos in the link around this page here.